The waiter spit in her soup, but the Mafia Boss made him lick it off the dirty floor. It happened in slow motion, a glob of white froth hitting the center of the steaming tomato bisque, rippling the red surface like a stone dropped into a bloody pond. Elena stared at the bowl, her hands trembling not from fear, but from a hunger so profound it felt like her stomach was digesting itself. She sat in the corner of La Veta, the most exclusive restaurant in the city, a place where she had once been the headline act. Now, she was a ghost haunting her former life. Her coat was 3 sizes too big, stained with the gray grime of the city streets, and her fingers, those long, delicate fingers that had once commanded standing ovations at Carnegie Hall, were red and cracked from the frost. She had scraped together $4.12 in quarters and dimes, enough for the cheapest appetizer on the menu. She had not eaten a solid meal in 3 days. The waiter, a man named Marco with slicked back hair and eyes that held the cruelty of a bored child, loomed over her. He had not just recognized her, he had relished the recognition. He remembered Elena from 5 years ago, when she wore silk and diamonds, when she tipped $100 without blinking. Now, seeing her reduced to a beggar counting coins, something dark and ugly had bloomed in his chest. Bon appetit, maestro, Marco sneered, his voice loud enough to carry to the nearby tables. Compliments of the house. Added seasoning. The couple at the next table, draped in furs and sipping vintage wine, giggled behind their napkins. They did not see a human being, they saw a stain on the tablecloth of their perfect evening. Elena looked up, her eyes hollow and dark. The smell of the basil and roasted tomatoes drifted up to her, intoxicating and cruel. Her body screamed at her to eat. The rational part of her mind, the part that remembered dignity and pride, screamed at her to stand up, throw the soup in his face, and walk out into the snow. But the snow was cold, and her blood was running slow and thin. Survival was a brutal master. It did not care about pride. It only cared about calories. She gripped the silver spoon. It felt heavy, alien in her hand. If she ate this defiled, humiliated charity, she would cross a line she could never uncross. She would acknowledge that she was no longer Elena the pianist, but an animal willing to eat filth to stay alive. But if she walked away, the dizziness that had been plaguing her all afternoon might finally pull her into the darkness for good. Marco crossed his arms, waiting. He wanted to see her break. He wanted to see the former queen of the city swallow his insult. "What's the matter?" he taunted, leaning closer, his breath smelling of stale coffee and malice. "Is it not up to your standards? Or have you forgotten how to use a spoon?" Elena lowered her head, feeling the heat of shame burn her frozen cheeks. Her hand shook violently as she dipped the spoon into the bowl, careful to avoid the center, trying to scoop from the edge where the broth was still pure. She lifted it toward her lips. The metal of the spoon touched her bottom lip, and a tear leaked from her eye, tracking a clean line through the dirt on her cheek. She opened her mouth, the aroma of the soup overpowering her hesitation. "Look at her," Marco announced, his voice booming through the hushed dining room. "She's actually going to do it. A rat eating trash." Elena flinched, the spoon clattering back into the bowl, splattering red droplets onto the pristine white tablecloth. The sound of the china rattling was like a gunshot in the quiet room. Laughter rippled through the restaurant, not just from the couple nearby, but from across the room. It was a jagged, sharp sound that tore at her skin. She could not do it. She pushed the bowl away, her chest heaving with dry sobs. I see not, she whispered, her voice a rusted hinge. "Please. Just let me leave." She reached for her pile of coins on the table, desperate to gather them and flee, but Marco's hand slammed down over hers, trapping her fingers against the wood. The pressure was painful, grinding her knuckles together. "Leaving so soon?" Marco hissed. "You ordered the soup. You made me bring it out here. You contaminated the table with your smell. You think you can just walk away?" "I did not eat it," Elena pleaded, trying to pull her hand free. "Please, you spit in it. Everyone saw." "I saw nothing of the sort," a cold voice cut in. Mr. Rossi, the restaurant manager, waddled into the light. He was a man who measured the world in profit margins and appearances. He looked at Elena with pure disgust, as if she were a cockroach scuttling across his polished floor. "Mr. Rossi," Elena gasped, recognizing him. "It's me. Elena." I played here for the governor's ball. I brought you thousands of customers. I do not know you, Rossi said flatly, adjusting his tie. I see a vagrant disturbing my high-paying clientele. You ordered food. You pay. And since you made a scene, there is a service charge. I have money, she stammered, pointing to the coins under Marco's hand. Rossi laughed, a wet, dismissive sound. That scrap metal. That does not cover the cover charge, let alone the soup. Marco, get security. But first, make sure she understands she is never to darken this door again. Marco grinned, sensing permission to escalate. He grabbed Elena by the collar of her worn coat and yanked her out of the chair. She stumbled, her legs weak from malnutrition, and fell hard onto the parquet floor. The impact knocked the wind out of her. Get up, Marco barked, kicking the side of her boot. Do not play dead, you useless junkie. The guests watched with morbid fascination. No one stood up. No one offered a hand. Elena lay on the floor, looking at the forest of polished shoes and table legs. This was it. This was the bottom. The music in her head, the symphony she used to compose in her sleep, had finally gone silent. There was only the hum of the refrigerator and the laughter of the rich. She closed her eyes, wishing the floor would simply open up and swallow her whole. Take her out back, Rossi ordered, checking his watch. And throw that soup in the alley. Even the stray dogs have better standards. Marco reached down, grabbing a handful of Elena's hair to drag her toward the kitchen doors. Elena cried out, a sharp sound of pain that echoed off the high ceilings. Let go of her, a voice said. It was not a shout. It was not a scream. It was a low rumble of thunder that seemed to vibrate through the floorboards. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees instantly. Marco froze, his hand still tangled in Elena's hair. Mr. Rossi turned pale, his eyes darting toward the shadows of the private mezzanine that overlooked the main floor. From the darkness of the corner booth, a man emerged. He was tall, dressed in a black suit that cost more than the entire restaurant's kitchen equipment. His face was a map of sharp angles and old violence, marked by a scar that ran through his left eyebrow. But it was his eyes that terrified people, dark, abyssal, and completely devoid of mercy. It was Lucas Volkov, the owner of the building. The man the city whispered about in terrified hushed tones. They said he had taken over the underworld not with guns, but with a brutality so efficient it was almost artistic. He had spent 10 years in a maximum security prison before his conviction was overturned on a technicality, and since his release, he had bought half the city. The restaurant went deathly silent. Even the silverware stopped clinking. Lucas walked slowly down the few steps from the mezzanine. His movements were fluid, predatory. He did not look at Rossi. He did not look at the guests. His eyes were locked on Marco's hand, which was still holding Elena's hair. I said, Lucas repeated, his voice dangerously soft, let go. Marco released her as if he had been burned. He scrambled back, wiping his hands on his apron. Mr. Volkov. Sir, we did not know you were here. This trash, she came in smelling like a sewer, disturbing the guests. I was just removing her. Lucas ignored him. He knelt down beside Elena. For a moment, Elena flinched, expecting another blow. But Lucas's hand did not strike. He reached out and gently, with a tenderness that shocked everyone watching, brushed a strand of dirty hair away from her face. Elena, he said. It was not a question. It was a reverence. She looked up at him, her vision blurry. Do I know you? No, Lucas said, his eyes scanning the bruises on her wrist where Marco had grabbed her. But I know you. I know every note you ever played. He stood up, offering her his hand. She took it, and he pulled her to her feet with effortless strength, supporting her weight when her knees buckled. He turned to Mr. Rossi. The manager was sweating profusely, dabbing his forehead with a napkin. Mr. Volkov, please understand, we have standards, Lucas interrupted. He walked over to the table where the bowl of soup still sat. He looked at the white froth of spit floating in the red broth. Then he looked at Marco. You spit in her food, Lucas said. It was a statement of fact. She's a beggar, sir. And then you tried to make her eat it, Lucas continued, his voice void of emotion. You thought it was funny to feed a starving woman your own filth. It was a joke, sir. Just a joke, Marco stammered, backing away until he hit the wall. I like jokes, Lucas said unsmilingly. He picked up the bowl of soup. The china looked fragile in his large, scarred hand. He walked over to Marco. The waiter trembled, expecting Lucas to smash the bowl over his head. Instead, Lucas turned the bowl over and poured the steaming, spit-tainted soup onto the pristine floor right in front of Marco's shoes. The red liquid splashed onto the waiter's polished leather. Eat it, Lucas said. Marco blinked. What? You heard me, Lucas said, his voice dropping an octave, turning into a growl that made the hair on everyone's arms stand up. You thought it was good enough for her. So it must be good enough for you. Get on your knees and lick it up. Sir, I see not, it's the floor, people are watching. Lucas reached into his jacket. He did not pull out a gun. He pulled out a phone and typed a single message. A second later, the front doors of the restaurant locked with a heavy electronic thud. Two men in dark suits materialized from the shadows near the entrance, crossing their arms. Nobody leaves until the plate is clean, Lucas announced to the terrified room. He looked back at Marco. The floor, Marco. Now. Rossi tried to intervene. Mr. Volkov, this is insane. You see not, Lucas turned to Rossi, his eyes blazing with a sudden, terrifying fire. You stood there and watched. You laughed. If you speak one more word, you'll be down there with him. Marco, sobbing now, fell to his knees. The humiliation was absolute. The silence in the room was suffocating as he bent forward. Elena turned her head away, unable to watch, but she could hear the wet, sickening sounds. She felt a wave of dizziness. This monster, was defending her with a cruelty that matched her attackers. That's enough, Rossi suddenly shouted, desperate to save the reputation of his establishment. He pointed a shaking finger at Elena. She's a thief. That's why we treated her this way. Mr. Volkov, she stole silver from the tables last week. We have it on camera. We were just protecting your property. It was a lie. A desperate, clawing lie. But for a second, the room believed it. The patrons murmured. Of course. She's a criminal. That explains it. Elena felt her heart stop. If Lucas believed him, if this was all a trap. Lucas looked at Elena. She shook her head weakly. I did not. I swear. Lucas looked back at Rossi. I know she did not. How? Rossi challenged, his voice shrill. How could you possibly know what a street rat does? Because, Lucas said, walking back to Elena and placing a protective hand on her shoulder, for 5 years, while I sat in a concrete box in solitary confinement, the only thing that kept me from smashing my skull against the wall was a small radio. And every Sunday night, they played her broadcast. He looked at Elena, and for the first time, the darkness in his eyes softened. Her music saved my life. I bought this building 6 months ago for one reason, Rossi. To find the woman who wrote the Nocturne in E minor. I checked the records. I knew she used to play here. The realization hit Rossi like a physical blow. He was not just firing an employee, he had tortured the owner's muse. Elena stared at Lucas, the pieces falling into place. The intensity in his eyes was not pity, it was gratitude. Indebtedness. The most dangerous man in the city felt he owed her his sanity. Lucas turned his attention back to the floor. Marco was retching, the red stain on the floor mostly gone. Get out, Lucas whispered. Run. If I see you in this city by sunrise, you will not leave it walking. Marco scrambled up, slipping on the wet floor, and bolted through the kitchen doors. Lucas then turned to Rossi. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a gold lighter and a folded piece of paper, the deed to the restaurant management contract. Mr. Rossi, you seemed very concerned about the bill earlier, Lucas said calmly. About the cost of the soup. I waive it. Of course, sir. It's on the house, Rossi squeaked. No, Lucas said. The debt is paid. He flicked the lighter open. The flame danced in the reflection of his eyes. He held the contract over the flame. The paper caught instantly, curling into black ash that floated down onto the expensive tablecloths. You refired. Get out of my building. But, my severance. My contract. Your severance is that you get to keep your teeth, Lucas said. Rossi did not wait. He fled the dining room, the heavy oak doors swinging shut behind him. The restaurant was dead silent. The wealthy patrons sat frozen, terrified that the eye of the storm would turn on them next. Lucas ignored them all. He took off his suit jacket, silk-lined, warm, smelling of expensive cologne and tobacco, and draped it over Elena's shivering shoulders. The warmth was instant, overwhelming. I have a car outside, Lucas said gently. I have doctors on standby. A warm bed. Food that is not poisoned. Elena pulled the jacket tighter. She looked at the men who had just dismantled her tormentors with the precision of a surgeon. She should be afraid. He was a criminal. A violent man. But as she looked at him, she did not see a monster. She saw the only person who had looked at her in years and seen a human being. Why, she whispered. I'm nobody now. My hands. I see a not even play anymore. The cold ruined them. Lucas shook his head. Your hands are fine. They just need rest. And even if you never play another note, you saved me. Now it's my turn. He gestured to the back of the room, to a raised platform where a magnificent Steinway grand piano sat covered in a dust sheet, and used since Elena had been fired years ago. I bought it back, Lucas said softly. The one you sold to pay your husband's gambling debts. I tracked it down. Elena's breath hitched. She walked past the stunned diners, her boots dragging on the carpet, until she reached the instrument. With a trembling hand, she pulled back the cover. The black lacquer shone under the chandelier light. It was her piano. The one she had learned on. The one she had cried over. She sat on the bench. It felt like coming home. She looked at her red, cracked fingers. Then she looked at Lucas, standing guard between her and the world, a sentinel of darkness keeping the wolves at bay. She did not play a symphony. She did not have the strength. She placed her fingers on the keys and played a single, simple chord, C major. It rang out, clear and bright, cutting through the heavy atmosphere of the room. It was the sound of a morning after a long, dark night. Lucas closed his eyes, exhaling a breath he seemed to have been holding for 5 years. Elena looked at him, and for the first time in forever, a small, genuine smile touched her lips. She was not just a survivor anymore. She was protected. Take me home, she said. Lucas opened his eyes, offered his arm, and led her out of the restaurant, leaving the stunned elite sitting in silence, staring at the empty soup bowl and the wet spot on the floor where justice had been served.